to all of you who are joining us today. We are excited to have the Tacti Executive Board joining us again, and it's a new tradition that I hope will continue for years to come. The committee members who are joining us from the State Board are Mr. Bob Eby, Mr. Nick Darnell, and Mr. Jordan Mullenhour. Have I missed anyone? I think I have everybody. Okay. We're going to get started by, I'm going to turn it over actually to Erica Light, who will preview our agenda for us and launch us into the full agenda. And along the way, we'll stop to have questions from you all. And then toward the end, you'll know we'll have a discussion with the Tacti Executive Board, and we look forward to that. So Erica, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'm just going to briefly go over our agenda today. I apologize, this slide here is slightly out of order. We will begin with our presentation from Williamson County Schools if we have our presenter here on. I'm looking to see, are you here, Vicki Hall?
I am here. I'm not sure if my video is on or not. Can you hear me? Yeah, there I am.
Yes, okay. We can hear you. So that's the most important part, although, oh yes, now I can see you too. Okay, so we will start with—
You can see my lovely background there, my messy my office, but.
So we will begin with our presentation from Williamson County Schools on teacher staffing and turnover. The presentation on statewide data on teacher vacancies has been moved to later in the agenda. Apologies for the inaccuracy on this slide here. So after the presentation from Williamson County, we will go into an update on TDOE annual reports. Then I will be presenting on first-time pass rates on content area licensure exams for teachers. At that point, we will then have the presentation on statewide data on teacher vacancies, and then we will conclude with our discussion with the Tacti Executive Board. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I will hand it over to Vicki Hall of Williamson County Schools. And I am happy to control the slides for you. If you would like, just let me know when you would like.
That'd be great. Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for allowing us an opportunity to share some information with you. First, I'll give you just a little bit of background on how I came to do part of this presentation. I was asked to present to our school board about staffing data. In particular, how well hiring had gone. I think probably statewide. This is at least my impression. I don't have hard data on that. Staffing was a little down this year. We had vacancies that kind of stayed with us all year long that were challenging for us because we had certain subject areas that we couldn't fill. It's in particular, one is coding, which is a CTE course that we had a really hard time filling and keeping that class available for students. So we did struggle with that, and we struggled also just with absences because you may remember it seems like it was a long time away, but it really wasn't. Back in October, we kind of had that spike of COVID. So we had a lot of staff that were out. We had a lot of teachers out, and then in particular, our special education paraprofessionals, they would be out, and that would really put, a strain on the staff that was remaining in the building. So it was highlighted this year when we had openings that weren't able to be filled because we struggled with having enough substitutes to fill, especially during those times when illness was active. And that was, back in the fall. And then, of course, in the winter, it's always a little bit more challenging because you just have people out with whatever they may get, and their kids are sick and that type of thing. So I presented this data for our board and shared a lot of information with them, and some of that I'll share with you this morning. So Erica, if you want to switch slides, thanks. So this was our resignation data, and you can see up in the top right box, we kind of tracked the resignations for 2019, 2020, and 2021. And for May 2021, where we actually had 218 teachers to resign. That was the end of last school year. And it's interesting because you compare it with 2020, right during when COVID broke out. We had very few resignations then. I think people were staying put during that time. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. And then over in October, you can see we went up some because that was that spike of COVID again in the fall. So that went up. And then our totals were higher for 2021 than they had been in 2019, which is probably a more comparable year for us than 2020 was. So we have about 3,200 licensed employees, teachers in our district. And every year, I think this year, we have hired 600 teachers. And that's not all at the beginning of the year. You know, for August, we hired around 450. But over the year, we've lost another 150 and had to replace those. And that is where we're seeing the most challenging places for us to fill is when we're losing teachers. We just don't have that backfill like we used to have a few years ago. So that's a part, something that we're having to address is not only do we have to be staffed, you know, at the beginning of the year, but if you lose 150 over the course of the year, you've got to refill those positions, and that part is very challenging because we just don't have new students coming out of school during those times typically, except, you know, we'll catch a few in December for the beginning of the semester. But you can see that we had a 23% increase in resignations from 2019 to 2021. And still the biggest factor for us here in Williamson County is that we just have a lot of families that are moving out of the area or people who are moving out of the area. We do have some that go to other districts. They leave and go to other districts. And then we also have seen quite a bit of turnover just to either stay home with their own children or they want to change professions altogether. So we're kind of combating all of these different variables that make it a little bit tough to stay staffed. Oh, well, and then if you'll go ahead and change, Erica, thanks. So this is our percentage of turnover, which is not, you know, it's not alarming. It did go up 2021, 2022. So again, the turnover is not as much. There is a higher turnover by a little bit, but where we're really feeling the impact is just the inability to fill once we lose those teachers. Then if you'll switch over, Erica. And here, this is going to identify and kind of highlight what I've been talking about. This is our applicant on the left of your screen. Applicants for WCS teaching positions has decreased 50% over the past 5 years. And that is really scary to us. We were at, you know, a very high level of applicants, and now it has shrunk significantly. And then you can see the corresponding box here next to it. And this is data that reflects our in-state recruiting pools from the universities. And you can see this drop particularly is marked between Lipscomb and MTSU. See how they both really, in 2017, they really start to drop off. We've seen a little bit of rise with Lipscomb, but MTSU's is still doesn't look like it's really flattened out yet. So we're really noticing a drop of students that are available, and all, of course, districts in Tennessee, in particular Middle Tennessee districts, are really competing for this same group of students that are coming out of school. And then if you'll want to flip to the next slide. And so this slide here is one that I put in at the end of our presentation. I did a lot of the presentation was around salary and benefits because obviously, you know, teachers, you can see from this slide, they want to feel appreciated, need to feel appreciated. Nobody joined the teaching profession or anything in the public sector to get rich, but they do need a couple of things. They need enough to be able to live comfortably in their community. And then they also just want to feel that sense of appreciation, and like the community is trying to keep them and appreciates the service that they're providing. So this year we really did notice a significant drop in morale. The whole year of COVID, and then the 2021-22 year, or 2020-21 year was really tough. It took a toll. And when you talk to mental health professionals, they all kind of mentioned that give us about a year into COVID and into the pandemic, and you're going to see a decline in mental health, and you're going to see, some depression and those type of residual effects of having to, kind of barrel through a situation that nobody had ever gone through before. And it was really tough in the schools. They were trying to manage expectations of parents and everybody. It felt to me as an observer, and I'll be really honest with y'all because that's why I'm here. It felt like there was so much grace for other businesses and other professions, but the expectations on schools was that nothing would change. Everything would be the same. Students would learn like they've always learned. We'd have after school care, before school care. Everything would go like it had in the past. And it just wasn't like that. It was really, we started out taking temperatures and, having to answer all the questions coming in the doors, and all the quarantining that went on. And then, community members, parents being upset if we had to go remote. It was just a really taxing time. And I think that coming into this school year, there were the residual effects of that. And then when we had that spike of COVID again in the fall, it really just sucked the life out of a lot of teachers and staff in schools. So I think that's kind of just the fight about masks and the fight about curriculum. All of these things just really put a burden on our educators, and they're just feeling tired from it, to be honest about it. And I do want to at least end on a positive note that the perception is that that's starting to get a little bit better, that they're starting to kind of feel some of the support that's coming in for them and some of the appreciation. So I feel like we're moving in the right direction, but it's also important I felt it was important for our board to understand that. And, I'm happy to share that with you as well, that it's a tough time to be an educator, which I know you already know all that. So anyway, just sharing our perspective on it.
Great. Thank you very much, Vicki. If anyone would like to ask questions of Ms. Hall before we move on to our next presentation.
I will jump in first and say thank you so much for being here today and sharing this data with us from Williamson County Schools. We've heard this, of course, not to this level of degree from you, and I personally appreciate your honesty. And so as a board member and chairing this committee, it's really very important for us to hear these kinds of things, to hear the truth from you, and put our arms around how do we as a state board address this, recognizing that there's so many pieces and parts to this and everybody owns it, but together we need to be able to make the changes necessary to change the narrative, to improve the culture, to improve the support, the respect for the profession, which I think most of us believe it is the most noble profession that is there today. And it's been that way for years, in my humble opinion. And the position used to have more respect than it does today. And there's pressures from so many different areas. And I think we could fix, one or two, but then there's 5 or 6 that we have no control over. So I think we need to think about what do we need to do. First, what can the board do? But then how can we help affect change across the entire spectrum. What can we do as a board? And so I want to hear from other board members, but Ms. Hall, I do want to, ask you just a couple of questions specifically to your, apologize for the ringing phone. With regard to the pipeline, we've talked about the pipeline in this particular committee and at the board level, board meeting level, and that is everybody, you have partnerships with with the EPPs, and we have the Tacti executive board with us today. But we've been talking about grow your own programs and what districts are doing to promote education and trying to start building that pipeline at the district level. And we know that's not going to solve the problem today, but I'm just interested to know, what are you doing in Williamson County, such as offering TAP, teaching as a profession, and any other programs that you might have to build that pipeline? And then we can talk about other avenues that we could pursue as a board.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that, because I do want to highlight that as a really positive area for us. The embedded license and the partnerships that we've had with EPPs in the state have been a lifesaver, and I am really serious about that. We have had great candidates come to us. We have got programs with several EPPs in the state, and what we've really been able to do is offer discounted to 100% paid for tuition to some of our classified staff that have bachelor's degrees, and enter them into a program that lasts for about 18 months, and they are able to attain their teaching license. We've had cohorts in math, we've had cohorts in science, we've had world language, and we've really benefited from special education. We have had a lot of our staff that have gone through and received their certificate in special education, and we've been able to place those teachers immediately into classrooms, and that has been a really, really good program for us. I think the part, it's that first year is a challenging year for them, because they've never been teachers before. It's like, I could go get a license to teach, probably going through one of these programs, but I have no training, and I'd be a work in progress for sure. I guarantee it. So it's a little bit challenging from that standpoint to be able to be confident that we can provide the support that they need, but it's been great. So we're very appreciative of that avenue.
Madam Chair, this is Bob Eby.
Yes, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, this is very helpful information, and as the chair says, this isn't really surprising. But I did have one question. You talked about some of the difficult positions, coding and special ed. Do you find that the differentiated pay plan is helping in filling some of those, and retention? How effective do you see that the differentiated pay plan is, and any comments on that?
It's definitely a good tool for us. It's been really helpful. Hiring bonuses and retention bonuses for those hard to fill areas. So I do think it's very helpful. It's like everything else. It would probably be more helpful if we had more dollars to put into it. But for what we're able to do, it's very helpful. I think that it's the market that we're in, we have to have that. So it does help.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Jordan.
Yes, Jordan, please proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Hall, I would just echo the previous comments. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I just have one question. On your first slide, where you referenced the top reasons for leaving in 2021, my back of the napkin math indicates that we've captured 72% total of the reasons. Do you have any sense of the remaining 28%? Are those just a wide variety of individual reasons, or can you give us even some anecdotal evidence of other reasons that might round out that last 28%?
They were kind of all over the board. Some were medical, Some were to stay home with children, which may have been different than personal. We do a pretty good job of like separating it out to try to segregate like what the real reasons are for staying at home. But it generally it was that type of thing. And it was, we don't have pay on here. Pay was definitely a factor. Just straight out pay, not related to career change or another education job.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. I'll make it a point to follow up with some of the staff to see if we have any other insights into more broadly why we think people across the state might be leaving. I appreciate that answer. And the last question is on your, I guess on the third slide where you were referencing the different schools, the different schools from which teachers are applying. Do you have any sense of why that decline is occurring? Is it economic driven? Is it other industries? Is it are they just seeing less interest in people applying for those programs at those schools? What we see that there's clearly a trend. I'm just trying to understand why you think that trend might be developing. And thank you.
So I think the answer is yes. It's all of the above. It's a lot of stress. I mean, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of criticism. I know on my last slide, I put social media and just the criticism of the public. And I got to tell y'all, in HR, I see that all the time where there's, because people will send me that where it's just, there are community groups that are just, they're waiting to pounce on a teacher, and it's not, the stress of it is really just not worth $45,000. And that I'm just, again, I'm just being really honest with you. It's a stressful job, even though, there's the thought of, well, they don't work in June and July, but it's a lot for the whole, on the whole, for what they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And the positives are still there, because we know the reason that teachers stay is because they love working with students and they love the outcomes that they see and making that influence on students' lives. So what we really try to do is, accentuate those positive parts. And we're working on our end, and I'll just kind of share this with y'all, is to really put boundaries, help teachers set some boundaries for themselves on, how, when they're not reading emails at 10 o'clock at night and trying to respond to emails. That's just another, I think that's part of it too, is that it's nonstop. There's just, texting and emails and social media. It's like everybody else too. It's just that a lot of what they see is, it can be negative, or there's an imbalance of negative coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I do want to turn to our Executive Director, Dr. Sarah Morrison. She has a couple of questions, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Amy Ilwin, who also has some questions and comments, and then we'll come back to see if there are other members who have questions. Dr. Morrison?
Thanks, Lillian. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm in transition, so I'm just on the phone. But Vicki, man, it's good to hear your voice. I miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all this with us.
Absolutely.
You've clearly gotten our thoughts flowing. A couple things. Some of my questions have already been covered, but I mean, it is a scary world when Williamson County is seeing a 50% drop in applicants over the last few years. We like to think of you all as the district that's able to steal from any other district and recruit from wherever you need to. And so that really is, to me, a troubling trajectory. So I was interested to know if there were any programs specifically that you were working on or had in the pipeline with your EPP partners beyond what you mentioned. So if there's anything more there that you're doing or thinking about doing, I'd love to know more specifics. And then you may have mentioned this, I was a couple minutes late dialing in, but do you all do an exit survey when your teachers leave Williamson County, or is it just as part of how do you capture that information essentially?
We do an exit survey, and so we gather that information that way. And periodically when we are able, we do even some calls from HR. We'll call some teachers, especially if we had a teacher that left. She was a 20-year veteran, and she just left in the middle of the year. And so we called to say, what in the world is going on? And it wasn't building specific. She was just exhausted and she just decided to leave. So there was that. But we, back to the working with the EPPs, we do feel like we have, I don't think there's anything more than what I mentioned. We've had math, science, world language, and special education that we're working with, and we've done a lot with Lipscomb University. But we have programs with other universities as well. But I think that we're kind of at that sweet spot where we have the number that we can handle, that we can place without it being overwhelming to the district to try to offer mentoring and support to those new teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just working with your EPPs to target the areas that you have coming open or where you're seeing vacancies.
Right,
sharing
that's
that
right.
information with them. Yeah, that makes sense. And then just last question is open-ended because, you know, you worked at the state for, you'd have to tell me how many years. What else should we be thinking about? Do you have any suggestions for the board or the department? I mean, I think the Grow Your Own has been a really positive development across the state, but are there other policies or programs that we should be trying to pilot or support that would help address some of the things that you're seeing?
So I do feel, you know, we feel optimistic. I want to say cautiously optimistic about TISA, because I do think that may provide some additional funding, or hopefully that the funding will be improved. I think we do, you know, still, we have about half of the teachers we've hired so far this year do not still have a license in Tennessee. And it still is a struggle to get those teachers licensed. And we've spent a lot of time here in my HR department just hand holding those teachers through the process. I'm a lawyer, I'm not an educator, but I can tell you, like, getting my law license is nothing compared to getting that teaching license and keeping that teaching license going from state to state. So I know y'all passed rules and regs that have made it much easier for teachers transitioning from out of state, but always keep that in your thoughts on how we can make that even a smoother transition, and you know, broadening, making, I think sometimes we get in a bind where we absolutely don't have anybody to teach a course. And those CTE courses in particular, that coding course is one that I know we just have not been able to staff this year. There's nobody from the private industry that is going to come in and work, you know, full-time or even part-time as a teacher. So it's challenging to fill those positions.
Great. No, that's helpful. We definitely hear that from others, and maybe we can follow up offline to get a few more specifics from you in terms of, you know, what the challenges are. Is it the, you know, various paperwork sort of submissions, the tests? It's probably all of the above, but that's helpful to know.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Dr. Owen.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Vicki. Thank you for being with us. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is getting to Mr. Mollenhauer's question about following up with staff on reasons people are leaving the profession. We don't have access to that at the state level, which is why we invited Vicki today. And one of the plans moving forward, if you all find this valuable, I think a good way to follow up is that we'd like to invite other districts to this study committee in the future to share their district level HR data as much as they're comfortable with in this format, so we can build over time an understanding of, you know, in Williamson County, they're seeing X. In a larger urban district, they're seeing Y. In a rural district, they're seeing Z. So that way we can try to get a picture of what's going on across the state without having real-time access to that individual district HR data. And then my question for Vicki is, on this same slide, I'm assuming, you know, if you have 5,600 applicants for 680 positions, I'm assuming that's not, you know, 9 perfect, wonderful applicants per position. Are there some where you see too many applicants who are maybe not there quality wise for you, and then somewhere you don't see any applicants at all? What does that spread look like?
So in the past, a couple of years ago, elementary was not even, it was not too difficult to fill. We were able to fill K through 5 pretty easily. This past year, we actually struggled some to have quality candidates in elementary. And I hesitate to say that quality candidate, but I mean, definitely, it's like I spoke about at the beginning of this, Amy. It's really, we're able to hire on the front end, but when we have a teacher that leaves in the middle of the year, you're really down to there's not a high quality candidate to backfill for that vacancy. So I think the reduced numbers are probably those 682 candidates that you see there on in 21, or the openings we have in the 5,600 candidates. There, a lot of them are going to be placed by the time you get around to November or December, when you lose a teacher in the middle of the year.
Amy, this is
Thank you so
Bob
much.
Eby. I think your suggestion would be really, really good, and I don't want to get ahead of the game, but I went through the slides on the vacancy data, and if I'm reading it wrong, the vacancy data doesn't necessarily comply or agree with what we're seeing here in Williamson County. What we see in Williamson County, I would have that perception across the state, but it appears that most districts don't have vacancies. I don't know, Vicki, can you address that or anything about your vacancy data? I mean, it seems like with your downward trend on applications and hard to fill jobs, that there would be vacancy there.
We have had about a 98 or 99% fill rate all year long. So if you hear that just at that number, and it may just be my focus on it is there, because when there is a vacancy, there is such an impact on that school, especially in a year where you've had illness and we've had difficulties fully staffing our classified side, our support staff in the schools as well. So I think it's just really highlighted. If other districts don't have as high of a vacancy rate, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get to it later today. Like,
Okay.
I don't want to jump ahead of the game, but it just seems to me that somehow we've got to reconcile that vacancy data with what I think is perceived and what I see across the state, like what you're showing here. So maybe when we get to that, we can talk about it.
Okay. So for us, it's really been specific areas. Again, it's been those CTE areas, and then it's been some special education that have really struggled this year to be filled. And for us, again, it's just that it's the impact of each and every vacancy on a school because of the lack of, substitutes in the fill-in data. It just puts a strain on the school. So even though our fill rate has been 98, 99%, it's just very impactful when we have a vacancy.
Vicki, this is Jack at the Tennessee Department of Education. I just wanted to ask real quick, and don't want to take very much time at all, but when you're talking about vacancy data, are you also including teachers who are teaching on a permit, or is it simply a classroom that doesn't have an individual in the classroom?
It's a classroom that doesn't have a teacher there. So we would include a permitted person as filled. I think, and we don't have a lot of permits. I think we had 2 or 3 this year. But we don't typically do too many permits. And I do feel like I want to echo to y'all, because I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, because we have access to a lot of applicants that a lot of districts don't. So certainly we're very fortunate with that, but it's, we've gotten spoiled maybe. I don't know. It's just hard to cover when we don't have a teacher in there.
Thank you. And then just real quick to clarify, because I think that Vice Chairman Eby, I had that same kind of question, and I know that you're referring to the vacancy data that we'll be presenting shortly, but I think you're talking about the fact that when you look statewide, the percentage of vacancies is pretty low. I think it's in that 2% or 3% range. Right. But I think then, Vicki, some of your slides have listed some higher percentages, but you also just said you have a 99% fill rate.
I did. So let me ask you, where are you looking at the vacancy rate? Because I don't, the slides I've submitted, I don't think I have the vacancy rate anywhere. I have
It's not the
resignation.
My question was how, like I say, we're going to get to the vacancy data later. And how do you reconcile that vacancy data we get with the fact that, you have 50% decline in teacher applications, et cetera. And so I'm looking at the problem now and the problem 5 years from now, et cetera. So I just think we need to be sure that we can reconcile. When I see a vacancy rate of only 2% and the data that we're going to see implies could be viewed, somebody could read that and say, oh, we don't have a problem, And so that's.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay. And that is true. I mean, we would, so it sounds like we're consistent with the state data. We're running maybe a 2% vacancy rate after the beginning of the year. It's like I mentioned, it seems like some of these specific areas that we're unable to fill and just the impact that a vacancy has on a building. It really and truly is that it's that backfill of it's when they leave after the beginning of the school year that we struggle to find a good quality candidate to place in that classroom.
And when you talk about the impact on the classroom, you need to talk about the impact on each individual student. So if a student doesn't have a teacher, I mean, that's a significant impact. So.
It's significant. It really is.
And that's exactly why it's so important to have you here with us today, because being able to drill down and understand the impact of vacancies within a district, that tells us the real story, because looking at a vacancy report is not talking about the details of what you're dealing with in your district. And of course, there's untold stories across the other districts as well. So I think that helps to level set us and understand you cannot just look at a report and make assumptions and any kind of determination with just looking at that data, to everyone's point. But I know we're running out of time. I just want to one more check. Is there anybody else who has a question for Ms. Hall?
Madam Chair, it's Nick.
Yes, Mr. Darnell.
So, Vicki, I would echo everything. We're in Hamlin County. I work for Hamlin County School System, and I echo everything. We're seeing the exact same things that you've talked about here in our district. I wondered, as the hiring season has started, of course, the earlier we can start, the better likelihood is that we can get some of these jobs filled. Have you been able to kind of see any trends for this upcoming hiring season that are more positive, or are you starting to see, similar effects?
So thank you, Nick, for that question and for I appreciate you experiencing the same thing. I will say the positive thing is really and truly our principals are been on the move to make offers and to get out there and get the teachers hired. So we are we are beyond where we were in June this time last year as far as hiring goes. So they are making decisions sooner and making offers sooner. So we feel good about that. I did notice from our career fair, we went ahead and had a career fair at one of our high schools here back in March, early in March, and it was live. We did not have nearly as many applicants from out of state as we had had in the past couple of years. So I'm not sure what the reason for that is, because we still have a lot of individuals moving here, but we did notice that there was a downturn in out-of-state applicants. But as far as hiring goes, I'm optimistic because we do have more offers out there and more early contracts signed than we have in the past.
What percent of your teachers do you get from other school systems versus out of the EPPs?
I do not have, I don't know the exact data on that. I don't have that. Most of our teachers, I can tell you that we hire, about half are in their first 5 years of teaching, and probably a third of the ones that we will hire this year that are brand new to the district will be brand new teachers. Close to about a third will be brand new.
So as you, in districts, you know, there are some districts obviously that pay different and can uh, have teachers from other districts come over. I know that happens here in Oak Ridge. So as you hire a district from somebody from a different district, that creates a vacancy in the district they came from.
That's right. That's kind of where there is a lot of battle back and forth. And I haven't shared this specific with you, but we've really, an area that we've been at a loss for is school psychologists. And they've been in extremely high demand. So districts have just been, you know, we're kind of getting into that cannibalizing ourselves on on positions like that school psychologist where they're so few and far between.
And I sit on the advisory council, the EPP, and there are several districts, you know, who are on the border states, and they lose teachers to Kentucky or Georgia or something like that, which is another challenge.
They do, yes.
Well, I'm going to interject right now that we're about 15 minutes over time, but obviously this has been an important discussion, and I thank everyone for the contributions to that conversation. And again, Ms. Hall, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been a big help to all of us, and to be able to ask you questions and to understand everything that's happening on the ground as much as you could share with us today. So thank you again. And I will turn it back over to Erica for the next update agenda item.
All right, thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair. And thank you so much, Ms. Hall, for being with us today.
Thank you all.
Next on our agenda, we have a presentation from the Tennessee Department of Education about their annual educator preparation program reports. And Elizabeth, if you're able to give presenter rights to Michael Derline, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I can run the slides myself.
Looks like I have rights. Thanks, Erica. Good to see everyone. Good morning. Michael Derline, Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation at the department. It's been a while since we've talked about annual reports, and I know for some members on this call, this will be a bit of a refresher. For the newer members, this may be new to you. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions throughout. Let me see if I can figure out how to move the slide forward. There we go. So here's our agenda. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose and provide a high-level overview of the EPP annual reports. The reports are built into two different reports. So there's the performance report, and we'll spend a little time talking about that and how it relates to things like comprehensive reviews and the interim review process. And then we'll talk about the insights tool, which is a very different report. Lastly, we'll talk next steps and timeline. So our annual reports, we've produced them now for 5 years. They're internal facing, and what that means is they're accessed through the TN Atlas platform. We built that platform through a significant IES grant. They're required by law, so they're now codified in law and have been for a few years now. We partner very closely with the state board staff in producing the reports, and we use the exact same 3 cohorts of data that you all use for the educator preparation report card. And the purpose is really a little bit different from the report card. We provide data to EPPs to foster programmatic improvement and inform program approval processes. So there are direct connections between our annual reports and the recommendations that you all receive for ongoing approval of EPPs. We look across 5 domains, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. And the outcome of annual reports each year is binary. Either EPPs either meet or do not meet expectations. Slide is a little busy, so I'll spend a little time working through it, but you'll see some similarities between the annual reports and the teacher preparation report card. So we look at everything from candidate recruitment and selection, employment and retention, candidate assessment, satisfaction, and completer effectiveness as well. Those items that are bolded and italicized are included on the accountability or performance report. The other areas are those that are included on the insights tool. So the performance report. The primary purpose of the performance report is really to provide EPPs, the state, and review teams with data that can be used to inform program approval recommendations during comprehensive reviews, inform the decision to conduct an interim review cycle between the 7-year comprehensive review cycle. And just a minute on that, a number of years ago, the board decided that that 7-year cycle was just too much, that we should look a little closer at EPP performance in between that cycle and intervene if need be. And that was the purpose of this interim review cycle. So if an EPP falls below expectations in 2 consecutive years on the annual report, they must undergo an interim review. So the goals of the performance report is really to highlight key metrics that we've identified for accountability purposes, set specific thresholds at 3 levels. So there are thresholds for every single metric on that performance report. EPPs must meet a certain number of metrics to meet the domain, and EPPs must meet a certain number of domains to meet overall. This is just a screenshot of the performance report. I will note that this is interactive for EPPs, so they can drill down into each domain and see their outcomes on specific metrics. I'll also note that domain 4 and 5 are not scored this year. Satisfaction surveys, it's been a little tricky to translate surveys into accountability metrics. And so that's kind of been on hold for quite a while now. And then much like the way the board has approached provider impact, that completer effectiveness and impact domain is not scored due to issues with testing over the last few years. So this just gives you a sense of what providers see when they get into their performance report. A few reminders about comprehensive reviews. So in Tennessee, the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, or CAPE, is the accrediting body that is an optional accreditation process for EPPs. About 60% of our providers go through that process. The 40% that do not go through a process that's managed by the Tennessee Department of Education with trained reviewers across the state. So this is that 7-year deep review of every EPP. And regardless of which pathway the EPP chooses, the process requires alignment to those CAPE standards. So I wanted to spend just a minute sharing information about the CAPE standards. They are changing, by the way, but these are the current standards that are in place. So standard 1 focuses on content and pedagogical knowledge. So looking at the national pedagogical standards and content area standards. Standard 2 focuses on clinical partnerships and practice. 3 focuses on candidate quality, recruitment, and selectivity. 4 is that program impact standard, so looking at completer effectiveness and satisfaction. And lastly, standard 5 looks at the quality assurance system. And this is a big one for our EPPs. How are they using within program and post-program completion data to improve their program? And so what we've done as part of our comprehensive review process, we've taken metrics from the annual reports and integrated them into our comprehensive review process. So this just gives you 2 examples of that. So with standard 1, one of the things that review teams look at deeply during that comprehensive review is how well the provider fared on the annual reports metric related to pedagogical assessment. Did they meet expectations on the annual reports on that specific metric? And we've tied that back to CAPE Standard 1. Another example is CAPE Standard 3, the percentage of completers who receive a high needs endorsement. That's a metric on the performance report, and it is tied back to the comprehensive review process every 7 years. Interim reviews. So the interim review process is kind of an interesting one. It's one where the department almost plays the role of a consultant. We're supporting the EPP in analyzing what are the root causes of deficiencies that are identified on annual reports. And then the EPP is expected to set goals and develop implementation plans that we monitor. The process is iterative, so that initial development process, we work with the EPP, we approve interim review plans. And since 2019, we've had 5 EPPs go through interim reviews, and they're at various stages of the process now. And you'll see those EPPs listed here. This has been some pretty exciting work because we have seen some significant growth and major changes that have been made at the EPP level as a result of annual report outcomes. The Insights tool is that tool within annual reports that allows the EPP to really dig down deep into their data. They can interact with the data in various ways. The data can be cut by specific licensure program areas or clinical pathways. And it allows for that disaggregation where data are available so that EPPs can better understand what's driving their overall outcomes. This is just a screenshot of the Insights tool. And right now it's focused on completer effectiveness and impact. Those vertical lines represent the state values and the triangles represent that EPP's values. In this case, we're looking at 3 years. So the EPP can just quickly see where do they stand compared to the state values. This is also interactive, so they can hover over this and see year-over-year outcomes. And they can also disaggregate the data by all those things that I mentioned just a moment ago. We did not develop metrics in a vacuum or thresholds. We worked really closely with our educator preparation working group to determine which metrics were appropriate for an accountability report, and then identify what those thresholds should be. So they looked back at historical data and set specific thresholds on every metric. Ultimately, though, the department did really draw a line in the sand to figure out exactly how many metrics should be met and how many domains should be met in order for the EPP to meet overall. All right, so where are we now? We are in the very, very final stages of production of the most recent iteration of annual reports. In fact, I was looking at them this morning, and we partner with STS on production of the annual reports. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens to resolve any issues that are in the system. Another sort of related thing that we've engaged in is a partnership with SAS to produce TVOS sites for EPPs, and we have recently reset all SAS TVOS user accounts. And so what that means is EPPs can log in and see their individual completers' TVOS data, which is a really, really great tool that I think builds on the Insights tool even more. And they can look at individual candidates and see exactly how they fared in the classroom. Over the course of the next year, as we do every year, we're going to revisit annual reports metrics and think about how those metrics are integrated into our comprehensive review process with our educator preparation working group. Happy to take any questions you all may have. I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions? You did such a great job. There are no questions. Yeah, go ahead.
He did do an excellent job, though I do have one question.
Well,
Michael,
questions are certainly understandable.
Concerning the areas that have, I guess, the standards that have caused some of the EPPs to require an interim review process, have you identified any pattern? Is there a particular standard that is catching people up or tripping people up in some way? And if so, how if at all, should we address that?
Great question. As far as the annual reports metrics go and those things that have triggered interim reviews, it's a bit all over the place. And so there has been, really we've had to sit down one-on-one with providers, and if the issue is performance on content or praxis assessments, talk about what exactly do they think in their program is causing poor outcomes on those assessments. If the issue is retention, how strong are their partnerships with the district, and why are those folks leaving the classroom earlier than they should? With respect to the CAPE standards, without question, I'd say that standard 5 has been an ongoing challenge, and that's that continuous improvement metric or standard where EPPs are really being asked to use the data that they have and inform programmatic improvements. With that, I think there's a few sort of levers that we've had. One is Tacti. We've used Tacti, I think, in a really positive way over the last few years to consider how we can have breakout sessions to support all EPPs and growing in areas where we're seeing those trends. The other is now that we're gathering information about EPPs that have gone through a review, maybe didn't do so well on Standard 5 and are now kind of coming back to make those revisions. I think we're well positioned to analyze kind of what they did and what worked and share that back with the community.
I have a question. It's really not in this subject, but since we got the Director of Educator Licensure Preparation, it goes back to the last presentation that was made, and Vicki Hall said that one of the biggest challenges they had was a struggle to get teachers licensed. And I didn't know if that was the process of getting it licensed or if it had something to do with passing the test or whatever. And so I wanted to ask, since we had you here, Michael, if you could kind of speak to that. If what do you see as the issue as far as getting people licensed?
Yeah, good question. Fortunately, I still get to chat with Vicki on those licensure issues, so I get to talk to her fairly regularly. So right now, I think we're actually in a good place as far as processing goes. So we're processing right now, each application type is either in April or May. So it's not that we're 6 months behind, and I know many states are. I think the answer to your question, though, is a bit all over the place. It's yes to all of that. Sometimes we do, as Vicki noted, do have to do quite a bit of hand-holding through the process. I think our system, TN Compass, is probably one of the best in the state as far as licensure goes. When I first started at the department, we were on paper, which maybe for some folks is easier, but what that meant was we were operating, an 8 to 10 month backlog. So I think there is a need to make sure that district HR folks are really brought up to speed on the current rules, regulations, and policies. And I think there's probably room to support them even more. Especially over the last 2 years, we've seen so much change in licensure, especially with out of state. That's something that the change is so quick that HR folks aren't often, brought up to speed or trained on those changes quickly enough. And our office is oftentimes spending time, modifying our system to account for those changes. And so there's a lot happening in that space right now, and that could account for some of it as well. And then tests, yes, I think you all have done a really good job on the research front, looking across our assessments. When people say candidates are performing poorly on the praxis, that's not true in every single area. And I think there are some assessments that stick out, and there's definitely some room to investigate why that might be the case and how well or not well they are aligned to the Ed Prep standards, and if there's anything that can be done there.
So Michael, in your capacity, would you lead that effort, or is there somebody else in the department that would take that on?
To support HR. Sorry, was it which part?
I apologize, but it was the last thing that you said with regard to making sure that. Oh, good gracious! I just lost my thought. But there was one question that who remembers what the last thing he said? I apologize.
To make sure that assessments are aligned with the EPP standards?
Yes. So thank you for that, Erica. Michael, would you lead that, or is there somebody else in the department that would lead that effort to make sure that they are in alignment? Is that you?
In part, it's me. I think that there's also, we have content experts across the department that I think are even better positioned to analyze the alignment of assessments. I think we've done a better job in recent years when we adopt new assessments of making sure those conversations happen early. Some of our assessments that we have in place have been around for a little while, and there's probably a need to revisit those.
And so to get back to the heart of my question is, who would drive that to make that happen? Is that something the board needs to push for? Is that who in leadership would ensure that takes place across the board within the department?
I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that's something that we can certainly talk about, who owns which part of it. And I think, one thing we did not all that long ago is we looked back at how old some of these tests are, and they're not that old, but there are some that are in the 8 to 10 year range. We have a really good working relationship with ETS, and we have a representative from ETS that I think can provide some information just with a quick ask. What standards is this assessment aligned to? When were those standards updated? And is there any sort of plan in place to regenerate these assessments? So before we get too far down the road on any one assessment, are they about to replace that? And so I think that that's another question that we would want to ask.
Okay. And then the other part was the support to the districts with regard to the changes and keeping up with the changes. Is it the core office's responsibility to ensure that districts are trained on the changes and brought up to speed, or who owns that?
We do. We work really closely with TASPA, the Tennessee Association of School Personnel Administrators, and that's a group of HR folks from across the state. We also have what we call the TASPA Cabinet. We have a smaller group of HR representatives. And oftentimes in those conversations, there are a lot of new HR folks across the state. And so when we present at their annual conference, or when we're meeting with the smaller cabinet group, we're kind of just revisiting a lot of the basics around licensure. We've also created the District Licensure Operating Procedures Handbook, which is kind of a one-stop shop for all things licensure. And anytime we're interacting with an HR representative from across the state, that's the first thing we point to. We say, well, actually it's not. First thing we point to are rules and policies. We say, here are state board rules and policies related to licensure. Second, here's an operating procedures handbook that we put together to support you. So that is without a doubt something that we're doing, but can always improve for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in listening to the response, and I appreciate what you shared, that it appears to me to be an opportunity to find another way to, even if it's a one page, I don't want to call it an executive summary, but a document that provides them the most important points, but links them to the details so that they are aware. And that's not going to take away the phone calls that you're going to get, but I think it would put them in a better position to understand what is allowed, so that this is not a continuous challenge. And you'll still have some for sure. There's no question about it. Thank you, Michael. Other questions before we move on to the next topic? Thank you. As always, Michael Durline, thank you so much. We appreciate you providing this update, summary for some of us, new information for others. So thank you again. Erica, back to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. The next presentation, I will be presenting myself. It's first-time pass rates on content area licensure assessments for teachers. This is a written report that the State Board staff have just released. It is posted to the meeting page for today's meeting, and also the board members who are on this call received a copy of this report in advance to take a look at. And we also have had discussions about this report with our Educator Preparation Advisory Council, so we made sure that we got input from them as we were creating this report. First of all, why did the State Board decide to make this report? This is based on a goal that is included in the State Board of Education's 2021 through 22 Master Plan, under the strategic goal of ensuring that high-quality educators are in every classroom. There was an action step of publishing first-time pass rates of educator candidates by EVP on content area licensure assessments. Historically, the State Board has published data on pass rates on licensure assessments, but it's always been the pass rate within 2 attempts. So the difference with what we're showing, or what's in this report, is that we're looking only at the candidate's first attempt at an assessment. And this is in recognition of the fact that retaking licensure assessments is costly in both money and time. And some candidates who don't pass the first time may decide not to try again. So we want to see how many people are managing to pass on their first try. The teachers who are included in this report are the same group of teachers that are in the Tennessee Educator Preparation Report Card that was released earlier this year. So it's a 3-year cohort spanning from the 2017-18 academic year through the 2019-20 academic year. And the exact rules for who's included depends on the type of pathway that the candidate is on. If the candidate is pursuing a student teaching or internship pathway, which is a more traditional pathway where they complete their program, receive their license, and then go into the classroom, we're looking at when they completed their program. If they completed during this 3-year window, they would be included in this data set. If they're pursuing instead a job embedded pathway, which is the type of program where the candidate enrolls in the program, immediately receives a license, and then is teaching as teacher of record while they're completing their program, in that case, we look at their enrollment date to determine if they're in this 3-year window. Notably, we're not including in this report occupational teachers, since they have a different set of assessments that they would take that's based on their specific occupational area. School services personnel are not included, and teachers who attended an EPP specifically to earn an additional endorsement are also not included. We're looking at initial licensure only. And finally, we're also not looking at candidates who are not affiliated with a Tennessee EPP. It is possible for just anyone off the street to register for a teacher licensure exam. And so we wanted to make sure that we're only looking at candidates who are actually going to or had recently completed a Tennessee EPP. We have several different types of teacher assessments here in Tennessee, so I want to make it clear exactly which ones are included in this report. First, there are admissions assessments. These are measuring candidates' basic skills at the time of entry into an educator preparation program. They're required by state policy for baccalaureate candidates, so undergraduate candidates only. And this could be exams like the ACT, SAT, or Praxis Score. Another type is pedagogical assessments, which measure candidates' teaching skills. These are taken typically while the candidate is in the final stages of completing their EPP. The most common here in Tennessee is the EdTPA, although there are some endorsement areas where candidates would take the Praxis Principles of Learning and Teaching instead. And then finally, there are content area assessments, which cover content knowledge of specific subjects that the candidate will be teaching. The timing of these varies by the type of program, which I'll get to shortly. And assessments in this category include Praxis subject assessments and also National Evaluation Series assessments, which is just a different assessment vendor who's also approved to, or has assessments that are approved for use in Tennessee. So for the purpose of the report we are discussing today, only this last type of assessment, the content area assessments, are included in this report. We have on the report card, we have information about all 3 types of assessments, but just for today, we're looking at these content assessments only. When do candidates take these assessments? It really depends on the type of program that they're in. In a more traditional student teaching or internship pathway, the candidate would take these assessments at some point while they're enrolled in their program, but not necessarily at the very end. They may take the content assessment right after completing the most relevant coursework for that subject area, for example. And EPPs may also have guidelines about when candidates should take each assessment so that they don't have to take all of them at once, all at the end of their program. For candidates who are in a job embedded pathway, things are a bit different. So these candidates, they need to demonstrate appropriate content knowledge before they enroll in their EPP. And that's because they will be serving as a teacher of record immediately upon enrolling in their EPP. To do that, they can either have a degree with a major in the content area that they will be teaching, or they can pass the relevant content assessment before they enroll in the EPP. So because of that, we know that the pass rates for job embedded candidates reflect, in most cases, the preparation that they received prior to coming to the EPP. So preparation from their previous education or their work experience, rather than things they learned from their EPP, since they had to take the assessment before entering the EPP. We also know that pass rates vary by content area. I know Michael mentioned this earlier. The data presented in the report includes assessments for more than 40 content areas, and some of those assessments have a nearly 100% first-time pass rate. And so for some of them, it is much lower. At a future meeting of this study committee, I intend to present data on state average pass rates for specific content area assessments. That would probably not be broken down by EPP at that point because there would not be enough people to report in for most EPPs, but looking just at the state as a whole, what are the average pass rates for specific areas such as math, science, PE, elementary education, etc. And also important to note is because the average pass rates vary by content area, this means that the average pass rate at the EPP level is influenced by which content areas are most popular at that EPP. So if there's a large percentage of candidates at an EPP who are, for example, doing secondary math, we know that that is one of the assessments that has a relatively lower pass rate. So that EPP might then have a lower average pass rate because they're preparing many teachers in secondary math. So that is the extent of my slides here. I know I did not put the actual data up on the slides. That's because that is all available in the report that is posted on this meeting web page, and it's mostly a lot of tables, so I thought it wouldn't make very good PowerPoint slides, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have before we move on to our presentation from TDOE about teacher vacancies.
Are there any questions for Erica?
I'll just say
Erica.
that, like I say, I sat on the EPP Advisory Council, and Erica did a great job leading that council, and I think the EPPs are very interested in the data, using the data, and one thing we talked about is actually getting second attempt pass rates too, as a further indicator of what might happen there. So,
Erica, I do have one question on the job embedded candidates who's obviously were showing a dramatic difference, in my opinion, on their pass rate. And I understand that that's not based on the EPP, it's their previous content knowledge. You explained that. And so do we have any information that reflects how many years since they passed their undergraduate program or whatever degree they earned? Do we have any idea how long it's been since they were in their undergraduate program or learning the content area? In other words, was it just a year ago, 5 years, 10 years ago? Because when you look at these pass rates, it's to me, dramatically lower, as I indicated, from those that are in the clinical practice or internship program. So any info on that?
I don't have any info available immediately at hand, but that's something we could potentially look at, since they do need to have to be in a job embedded program. You do need to show proof that you have a degree, a bachelor's degree, and so presumably that information about when they attain that degree, I know that that's recorded in TN Compass, so that is something that could potentially be looked at. I know that the actual assessment scores themselves, at the time that these data were collected, the rule in place was the assessment score had to be less than 5 years old. So we would not be looking at tests that somebody took a decade ago and then they signed up for an EPP and they got into the EPP using their decade-old score. It would have been within the past 5 years.
Okay, it's just interesting because I was first drawing a correlation to the fact that they haven't had the experience, they haven't not had any type of teacher training. When I say teacher, internship training, and I was thinking that was impacting these rates, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with that. It's strictly content knowledge. So I would want to know if the other members think that it's relevant information that we should have, because it's nothing we have control over. An individual makes the decision to go this path. And so I don't know that it would change the narrative, change the results if we asked for you to go digging and providing that data. Does anybody see any relevance to getting that kind of data? I was just interested in knowing if we had it. So I'm not sure it's relevant.
yeah, I mean, it's information, but I agree. I'm not sure how relevant
Yeah.
it is to what this is
I
about.
don't think so. Okay, great. Any other questions for Erica before we move on? Erica, thank you so much. Great information as always. We'll move on to the next agenda and I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. We have our final presentation today before we get into our concluding discussion with the Tacti Executive Board is a presentation on teacher vacancy data by the Department of Education. So I will now hand it over to Rachel Maves.
All right, can everyone hear me? Perfect. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you for having me here today to discuss our vacancy data. I just want to do a quick introduction because I've met some of you, but not all of you yet, and this is my first opportunity to serve before the board. But my name is Rachel Maves. I am the Chief of Preparation and Performance. I've been with the department for about 9 months now, so still new, learning a lot. By way of background, I was originally a high school English teacher, love the high school kids in that age group. Then I was a content specialist and an independent contractor under No Child Left Behind for districts that were in program improvement. I was a principal for a small private school, a superintendent. I worked at a county office of education, which is very similar to CORE. And then this is my second state education agency. I love Tennessee and being here. I couldn't speak more highly of my team, and I'm excited to jump into a lot of data with all of you today. As we start, I just want to provide a little bit of background and context to vacancy data as a whole. I think all of you are well aware we are seeing a national trend in high teacher vacancies across the nation. It isn't just something that is specific to Tennessee. It is something that is being talked about and discussed in every state. As you will see in the upcoming slides, Tennessee is no exception. Today, we are going to explore quite a bit of data, including, I think, key subject areas, grades, and geographic areas where vacancies are a current challenge, but I would say absolutely targetable. And that's something that I'm excited to discuss towards the end of the presentation. We're going to share a little bit about some of the innovative, creative solutions that we have in place to get quality educators in our classrooms, while our state and districts continue to implement new strategies to strengthen the teacher pipeline, recruit new talent, and then retain great educators. We've been having a lot of internal meetings that include Michael, Martha, and our teams to start to discuss what are some of those needs and how do we specifically target it. And I'm excited to share some of our thoughts and ideas with you. Before we jump in, I also just want to say a huge special thanks to the Educator Effectiveness team, specifically Martha Moore and Lauren Huddleston. Martha couldn't join us today because she's out on vacation, but they are the ones who are responsible for the development of the second round of survey data collection and truly are the reason why we have very clear data to share with you today. Lauren also did a fantastic job in developing these slides and the data visualizations, I think in a way that gives us very clear information. So I just wanted to highlight their work, the team's work, and say how appreciative, grateful, and proud I am of what they've put together. So I open it up to just any questions that you might have at any time, but we'll jump into the presentation. And again, you'll have to forgive me because we have a lot of data to show you today. Like all things, I'm going to anchor us in our 3 pillars for our strategic plan at TDOE. Academics, ensuring that all Tennessee students will have access to a high quality education no matter where they live. Student readiness, Tennessee Public Schools will be equipped to serve the academic and non-academic needs of all students in their career pathways. And then educators, where Tennessee will set a new path for the education profession and be the top state in which to become and remain a teacher and leader for all. Our vacancy data and what we are about to discuss, while it lives and I think is anchored in educators, has a significant impact in academics and student readiness. So we're going to jump in and I'll give you an overview a little bit of our data collection process. As you all know, this survey was developed in guidance by state board policy. It is required to be a survey that is administered alongside the differentiated pay plan. when we set out and get that pay plan from the districts, they are also required to submit their vacancy data to us, and we do that through a survey. I want to provide a little bit of background and context as well as to the difference between year 1 of this survey and year 2. So this was a new regulation that was put into place for 2021. We administered the survey the first year. This was prior to me starting, and actually it wasn't Martha's team who initially had delivered this survey. And I think that it was helpful. It came out in communication update for directors. It was a 1-week snapshot during October 20th through October 31st. Any position, when we've talked about vacancy, was defined as any position unfilled by a licensed teacher. So in that initial survey, vacancy included those who had no position, a teacher in that position, and those who are also on a permit or an endorsement exemption. The information was collected in vacancy by grade band and content area, and then the type of reporting was self-reported online. The only 2 differences I want to highlight in this year 2 survey is that, well, 3. One is that we really did increase our communication to ensure that people were giving us accurate information, and we hosted office hours, which Martha's team did a great job doing. The second piece is that the date was a little bit different. So while we collected it in October of the first year, we didn't collect it until February of the second year. And then the other, probably most significant difference with these surveys is that we decided in year 2, we wanted to tease out the number of positions that were unfilled and then those that were in permits and endorsement exemptions. I will say that the data collection for the permits and endorsement exemption was a little bit different because we have that information in TN Compass. So that was something that Michael's team and Martha's team were able to provide for us so that we had accurate data. It wasn't self-reported by the district. So all the information that was self-reported by the district was truly the vacancy data. So some limitations. I always, whenever I'm talking about data collection, I always like to share a little bit of the limitations because every data set that you get is going to have some caveat about how we use this data and the lens by which we should be looking at it. So the first, I think, is just to keep in mind that this is self-reported data. The LEA is the one who reports by gray band and content area. So there might be a margin of error in some of this information just based on this that is self-reported. It is something that we're having continued conversation around if this is a mechanism that we can put within TN Compass that would give us more accurate data, but for right now it's collected through the survey, and I think it's just an important piece to note. The second piece is submitting requirements. The director of school signature is not required for verification. Whomever the point of contact is at the district is the one who submits the information. It's also snapshot data. It's data that is taken at one specific point in time. So there are trends that could shift and change over a course of time that we weren't able to capture because it just gives us a glimpse. The other piece I think that's important is content areas. LEAs struggle with defining some content areas such as general education. That's something that we'll continue to provide guidance around. And then our other category really serves as a catch-all for non-tested subjects that include PE, music, and library. There are some comparisons with permits, endorsement exemptions, and non-tested vacancies that were just impossible to tease out without separated endorsement areas, which we don't currently collect. And then I think the last piece is the longitudinal analysis. It is a little bit tricky for the reasons that I shared before and the difference in the collection of the data for us to look at what we collected in 2020 and then 2021 and then what we collected this year, just because of some of the differences in definitions. So considerations for future implementation, anytime, and our team talks about this a lot, when you have a first year of data collection, it's gonna be dirty data. You're gonna learn a lot in that year of collection. The second year, you've made some improvements, and by the third year, you really have solid data that you can rely on and start to use to inform decision making. Not that we can't take some trends and information out of this, but it's really in that third year that you have that data in the quality and the space that you want. So some considerations for future implementation, looking at adding a dashboard for collecting and or displaying data, such as the T-Encompass add-on. This would streamline the process and make the data more useful and dynamic to districts. We've got this really robust data. We want to put it in their hands and help them to see how they can use this to inform decision making. Additionally, we've talked about the collection during 1 week of a school year may not provide an accurate view of district vacancy data. I think there's a lot of discussion around, is there a possibility that we can move this into a platform that potentially would be more dynamic? I don't think any of us want to send out any more surveys to districts as they're already inundated. But I do think that there's potentially a mechanism that we can embed it in a place that they're already putting information into. Any questions about the data collection piece before I move into the overview of the data itself?
Madam Chair.
Yes, George.
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent job. It is great to see you again. Just one very brief question. The data set, are we talking about all 95 counties or all districts across the entire state
Yes.
are feeding into this, or do we have any kind of inherent biasing based on the actual sampling itself?
No, all of our districts participated in the survey.
Okay, and just to clarify, my understanding is that they would only do that if they were applying for I guess the technical term is policy 5.60, the differentiated pay plan. So what I'm hearing from you is all districts submitted plans subject to 5.60, and therefore all districts are feeding data into this study.
That is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So here's any other questions? Sorry, I should pause really quickly before we move on. Okay. So I just want to give a quick scope of Tennessee's districts by locale type. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is a breakdown of city, rural, suburb, and town. That is a way in which we disaggregate data for a number of things. So we also felt that it would be beneficial to look at the data in the same way when we're talking about vacancies. This interesting, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, shows you on a map Tennessee's districts with 0 vacancies by locale type. So again, city, rural, suburb, and town. We did have about 50 districts that have no vacancies, and we'll go over that information as well, because I think there's some interesting correlations that we're looking at other data to help us understand the why of that. So vacancy data overview as a whole. What you're looking at is kind of a breakdown of the vacancy data by type. So for vacancies in 9 through 12, we have about 367. Vacancies 6 through 8, 297, vacancies K through 5, 328, and then vacancies pre-K is about 32. The top areas that we see are most heavily impacted are general education by far and grades K through 5. And then coming up pretty closely across the board is special education. That it seemed to be agnostic almost of grade span, that special education is a need. And then probably not surprising is math. And we hear that a lot from our directors as well, that math, especially in the higher levels, continues to be an area with higher vacancy rates. These are the 50 districts that reported 0 vacancies. And again, I think if you reference back to that map, you'll see that we have a mix of small, medium, and large districts that are reporting that they are fully staffed. We'll get into a little bit later some of the correlations that we saw around why we're thinking some of the things that they're doing well. It's definitely a continued exploration to better understand bright spots. For our unfilled positions, vacancies, endorsement, exemptions, and permits, I just want to give a couple of definitions for this. Vacancies are completely unfilled positions. Permits are our emergency credential for a teacher without a teaching license. And then our endorsement exemption, formerly known as the waiver, is the emergency credential for a teacher with a teaching license that allows them to teach outside of their endorsement area. So for example, you may have, I was a high school English teacher, but perhaps there was a need in social studies. And if I do not have an endorsement to teach social studies, I could apply for an emergency emergency exemption that would allow me to teach social studies in that setting. So when you look at the breakdown of what we're seeing, vacancies comprise 38% of the total people that we have in the classroom for teachers that are either unfilled or do not have a teacher with a permit or an endorsement exemption. Endorsement exemptions comprise about 12%, and then we have a significant number that are using permits.
Rachel, this is Bob Eby. Before you go on, understand when you say vacancy, is that a full-time position? Is that a vacancy of a class? How do you define a vacancy there?
My understanding is that it is a full-time position.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Oh, there it is. If you look at vacancies by locale type, you'll see that about 46% are in our cities, 29% are rural, and then town and suburb, probably not surprising, we're not seeing quite as many as we do in the rural and within the cities. And then we also have a breakdown of what that looks like by grade span. So within cities, suburb, town, and rural, you'll see by grade band for pre-K, it's pretty clear that there's a huge vacancy within the city. For the total for K-5 is the highest, and then 6 through 8 is spread pretty evenly for city, actually. And then it shows across for each of the different locales. So I think this gives us a pretty good glimpse when we're looking at those grade bands where we're seeing some of the largest issues. And again, I think it's probably not surprising. So vacancies by locale type, this is the breakdown of city districts, suburban districts, town districts, and then our rural districts. This just gives you a different picture of what we're seeing as far as those vacancies go, and then the breakdown by grade band. The only exception that we're seeing to this trend really is within the suburbs. Everyone else, we're seeing that vacancies are roughly evenly distributed among elementary, middle, and high school, with a slight dip in the middle grades bands, as you can see here on the orange. But we see a little bit of an exception with the suburb, where they're seeing more of the vacancy in the 9 through 12, and there is not that same dip that we see in the 6 through 8. That one actually was a little bit surprising to me, because I think that middle school is just a special type of person that enjoys that age and where the kids are. Average percent unfilled. So this just gives you an idea when we're looking at percentages where we're seeing, again, the most significant trends. City is probably unsurprising, and then rural, like we said, is coming in pretty close. We also took a look at permits and endorsement exemptions by area. So you can see here the other, like we said, this is kind of a catch-all. So this one's a little bit tricky to disaggregate. But physical education, ESL, which is our English learner endorsement, arts, world language, science, social studies, math, elementary education, and English language arts. You'll see, again, elementary education is where we're seeing that largest and most significant area for permits. Endorsement exemptions, not as much, and we're seeing a fairly even spread, I think, across the higher ones, which include the other ESL, math, science is a little bit further behind, and then elementary education. So this just shows the breakdown of vacancies, permits, and endorsement exemptions, again, by locale type. So you'll see that the city is by far taking advantage of the permits and the flexibilities with permits this year that were allowed. Vacancies you'll see within city and rural, again, are the highest that we're experiencing the biggest issues. And then the endorsement exemptions, city, which probably is unsurprising, but then town, suburb, and rural aren't too far apart from one another. We also broke this down by core region. We felt like this was helpful to look at because later on in the presentation, we'll talk about within the core regions where we also have EPPs that are located and the number of EPPs, which I think was helpful for us to start to look at where are places that we can lean in and continue to provide some additional support. So what you'll see with the core region, we have the core region listed here, we have the vacancies here, the total staff positions, and then we have the percent vacant by region, and then the percent of all Tennessee vacancies. The reason that we broke this down in both of these is because, as you'll see here, the percent of all Tennessee vacancies is really going to land in our Southwest, which would include Shelby, and then our mid-Cumberland area, which includes Davidson. I guess that's unsurprising that those two areas, given that they're two of our largest districts, are going to drive up what that percent of all Tennessee vacancies are. But then if you break it down and you look at it by region for total staffed positions versus vacancies, you'll see that Southwest continues to be high, but then we see that South Central here also, when you look at the average, is a little bit higher than the rest of the region. So it was also one that we pulled out and wanted to make sure that we were highlighting and digging into a little bit more to better understand what's going on within South Central, since it's so much higher than the other, I mean, not significantly higher percentage wise, but higher enough above the average that it gives us question to better understand what's going on. This includes some of what we just saw, but then adds in permits and endorsement exemptions, and also provides the total teacher count. So this is now looking at the total percent of unfilled positions when you factor in not just straight vacancies, but also the permits and endorsements. So you'll see again, South Central is rising to the top as one that is significantly higher. And then we are also now, when we add in those others, bringing in Upper Cumberland and Southeast into the mix alongside of Southwest and the mid-Cumberland area. So comparative analysis, this just gives us a look at what we currently have in existence for all instructional personnel and teachers total count from 2015 to 2021. This instructional personnel does include the teachers. So you'll see that the teachers is in the light blue, but then all instructional personnel are included here. So you get an idea of what that total number is and the difference between teachers and then the rest of the staffing. Here we break down the instructional personnel by subgroups, which includes our principals, assistant principals, supervisors of instruction, and then instructional coaches. This is not vacancy data. This is just telling us how many people that we have currently in positions.
Hey, Rachel, real quick on that last slide, any insights on the growth that we saw in the 2020, 2021 period, specifically with respect to principals and assistant principals?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. And Michael, I don't know actually if you have any additional context, but when I get to another slide, it shows the increase that we have in teacher candidates as well. And we do see an increase over the last couple of years. We don't have the most up-to-date data for 2022, but I would anticipate, unless Michael's seeing a trend otherwise, that we would continue to see a little bit of an increase, which for me is encouraging. I mean, that means that we're doing something right in Tennessee, where when we look at our retention rates across the nation, Tennessee tends to be a little bit higher, and we are also bringing people into the field, just not at the rate in which we need.
Rachel, though, excuse me, the only thing I'll add there is I do wonder, because we don't have data on vacancies in those positions readily available that I know of, but out-of-state flexibilities have definitely been put in place. And so I do wonder if districts have been now able to fill some, administrative, instructional supervisor, AP, principal roles through that pathway, but that's just a wondering.
And Jordan, I just wanted to chime in too and just mention if this is a topic that you're interested in, Tara, the Tennessee Education Research Alliance, which they gave a presentation during yesterday's study committee that I don't believe you were on, but they have a lot of good research out there on school leader staffing patterns and turnover and things like that that you can access that also might be of interest.
You all appreciate it. I'll follow up with staff on that.
So this just again gives you a picture of staffed teachers in Tennessee from 2018 to 2021. As you'll note, elementary teachers make up the bulk of our teaching staff, which isn't surprising, just in just numbers sake when you're looking at K through 5, typically in self-contained classrooms. And then secondary teachers, special education teachers, librarians, and counselors.
So when I look at that data, you know, when I think about teacher vacancy data and hear what we heard of Williamson County, it looks like to me that we have more teachers than ever over the last year. And so that's why I'm trying to understand vacancy data versus filled teacher positions, et cetera. Am I reading something wrong here? I mean, you look at 2021, some there, it's the highest yet.
Yeah, no, you're reading the data correctly, Bob. I think that what my initial analysis of this is that we have an increasing need for teachers.
Yep.
So this gives you the total number of teachers from 2018 to 2021, but it also doesn't offset it with those numbers of vacancies or retirees. So yes, we would see these trends of increases, but then when you offset that with the number of vacancies or retirees, then that's where we're getting into an area where we're not able to fill the need.
So some way it might be good to look at teachers versus student ratio or something like that to see how that trends.
Yeah, I like that.
I would say this could also just be an example of Tennessee kind of having a growing population.
Absolutely.
Building new schools and just having, to Dr. Maeve's point, a need for more teachers. And the other thing I was going to point out, just as we're looking at this data and thinking about kind of the presentation from the school district's lens and like the different metrics we have, you know, we have the metrics from our EPPs, the candidates that they're producing. We have turnover rates at the district and then vacancy rates at the district. And then we have the statewide data. And it's helpful for me, at least, to think of it in terms of like certain indicators being lagged and others being real time. And just understanding that, you know, some of these indicators we're looking at, such as application rates, even though we saw, you know, a pretty wide gap between the number of applicants in the open positions in a district like Williamson, for those numbers to be dropping is an indicator of kind of the future. And so there's kind of like a connectivity to think about where you can look at certain early indicators and then predict what it might look like 2 or 3 years down the road, which I think is important to keep in mind too, how all these metrics kind of work together.
Thanks.
The other piece that I would note, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, when we get to the point that we start to discuss some of the things that we're putting into place, that I'm really excited about, is that Tennessee, as a state, we're within reach. I mean, I don't know what it's looking like within other states, but I really do think that it is an ambitious yet achievable goal for us to be able to reach the target to ensure that we have highly qualified teachers in every classroom. And I'm excited about that. And I think the team's really excited about that as well. So then what we looked at that I think is helpful and important context is Tennessee's educator preparation program providers. You can see this is a quick map of where we see some of the clusters of where those providers are. And when we look at the data, I think that it provides a glimpse into potentially where I have identified some problem areas. So as an example, we talked about South Central and that being an area that has some huge gaps. And right now we only have the University of Tennessee Southern. So that's something that we're talking about of what are ways in which that we can make sure that districts are connecting with those high quality EPPs within their area to ensure that they're creating those partnerships to continue to boost that teacher pipeline. So this has been, I think, a helpful way for us to be able to look at that data as well. So when we started to also pull out retirees and EPP completers, I think this gives you a picture as well of where we're seeing some of the gaps. So for the retirees from 2019, 20, and then 21, you'll see we're seeing less retirees, but we still have a significant number that are retiring. And then EPP completers, we're producing quite a bit, but it's still not enough to meet what the current gap is. So it's almost like, yes, we are producing completers, but there's a gap here at the top that's still not getting us to the point where we're able to ensure that we have a teacher in every classroom. The 2022 to date, please keep in mind that we have not finished 2022 yet, so we'll see a number of completers post-graduation, and we would anticipate that this would be much higher. This I found very interesting and probably some of the most surprising pieces of the data. One is that there were no strong correlations between teacher vacancies and the following. One, the percentage of students of color, the percentage of students from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, the percentage of teachers who claims school climate is positive. That actually, I'm sorry, that was a mistake in that those two need to be moved out. And then the average salary of licensed teacher within LEAs. It is the other two, percentage of teachers who claim a positive climate and then strong leadership. Those actually are places that we saw moderate correlation. So we took the educator survey data and we did an analysis between those who saw high vacancy rates and those who did not see high vacancy rates. And we found that there was, again, a moderate correlation between those who had no vacancies and the percentage of teachers who had a positive climate and the percentage of teachers who said that there was strong leadership present, which I think is an area for us to continue to explore and reinforces, I think, what we already know from the research, that when teachers feel valued, respected, that it is a positive climate in which they're engaged and they have strong leadership present, that has a massive impact on not only our teacher vacancy data, but the culture in which the teachers are able to operate. We also know from research that one of the most pivotal positions in changing outcomes for kids is that principal leader. So this, I think, continues to support some of what we saw from that research. So here is a little bit of what the department currently has in place that we're really excited about and feel has a strong opportunity to make a difference in Tennessee to close that gap. First is the Grow Your Own program. I know all of you have heard a lot about that. It was first launched in 2020 in Clarksville, Montgomery County schools. That mission is specifically to recruit and prepare local community members to enter the teaching profession. So you are taking people that potentially are already serving in the school, but do not have a teaching credential, and bringing them alongside, enrolling them in that program, and then having that direct pipeline to get them into the classroom. It provides a no-cost pathway to the teaching profession by increasing EPP enrollment and the supply of qualified teachers through significant grants that we were able to offer. Currently, we have 65 partnerships with 14 EPPs in 63 school districts that have offered this free opportunity, and 650 future educators are currently enrolled, which is really exciting. And this was just the phase one of Grow Your Own. The second part of Grow Your Own that we've just launched is Tennessee's teacher apprenticeship model. This includes a job embedded teacher residency type program. It provides training for an experienced mentor for 1 to 3 years and EPP coursework while the candidate is able to earn a wage. We've heard from a lot of candidates that continues to be a barrier, that to be able to go back to school and not work is extremely difficult. So for them to be earning a living wage as well as getting the courses that they need and having an experienced mentor to work alongside them makes a huge impact. Some of the additional strategies that we've been talking about, as I mentioned before, is ensuring that each district has an EPP partner. As we were talking, Michael's team and Martha's team, I think, uncovered that there are some districts that do have a strong primary connection with an EPP, but then there are other districts that we have not had that partnership and connection point. So that's something that internally we've been talking through. How do we help support and build those partnerships? The other one that we've been discussing is sharing vacancy data with EPPs directly to guide endorsement support in high vacancy areas. That's something that we'd like to put into place coming up here pretty soon into the fall, late summer time, where we bring together the EPPs and almost do like a state of the state with them and start to look at and discuss this vacancy data, where they're at with the primary partnerships, how we can continue to build those connection points between EPPs and districts, and what support they would need as well to do that. So that, I believe, sums up this presentation of our data. There's more if you want to go through that lists an appendix of sort with all of the definitions of the locale, the types, and the specific districts. But I will pause there and see if you have any thoughts, questions, anything that you would like to discuss further.
There are questions for Rachel, because I know one thing is for sure. Lots of rich data, lots of information for us to certainly spend more time with and sink our teeth into. And I know we're running short on time, and we certainly want to allow members to ask questions. So Rachel, thank you so much, but I do want to see if there are any questions from our members today for Rachel.
It is a ton of data, and I want to digest it, but it's really, really helpful and good data that I think can be meaningful and as we drive through this. So thank you.
Lillian, this is Sarah. I just had one quick question.
Sarah. Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel. This is, such good information. We'll want to spend a lot of time, I'm sure, going through it and potentially follow up offline. But in terms of the correlation or the moderate correlation that you mentioned around school leadership and climate, I thought that was interesting. And is that coming from the Educator survey, or how are you making that connection?
Yes, that's coming from the Educator survey.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I was interpreting that correctly.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if there aren't any other questions, it was a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I hope that as we continue to have discussions about vacancy, when we come again next time, we'll be reporting continued good news as we see more and more coming into the teacher pipeline and exploring those ways and looking at the impact of some of the things that we have in place. So really appreciate the time today, everyone.
I would say one other thing is, I think going back to, again, looking at the Williamson County data and this data, trying to figure out what it means. I think Jack brought up a couple of good points. One is teacher, the future, what we're looking at in the future with regard to the decline of applications and what that may mean. Because I think that's what we need to continue to figure out, how to fill up the pipeline. So how do we can join those discussions together to be sure that we do meet that requirement of every class having a teacher. So good data, good discussions, a lot more to come is what I'd say.
Yeah. And Bob, thank you for adding that, because as you know, Rachel, you're at the end of the presentation. We still want to have a conversation and discussion with Tacti Executive Board, but we could almost spend an entire meeting on this topic, having all the information well in advance so we can sink our teeth into it, and then start to really discuss the solutions and all of the different pieces and parts to move the needle in the right direction. Because I do not want to underscore the importance of this, because it is critically important, which is why it's so important that we have it tied to that differentiated pay and you're collecting the data. So not to sell this short at all, Rachel. So again, thank you so much. And we will certainly be discussing this further and determining how we can do it and not feel like we're rushing ourselves in the process, because we've had so many great presentations today that were important for this study committee to hear. But thank you again.
Madam Chair, just a quick plug.
Yes.
I do believe we'll be given this exact same presentation at the State Board workshop. So hopefully between now and then there will be that time to dive into your point, and we can kind of have further, more informed discussion then.
Yes, Jack, and thank you for saying that. And of course, we always feel rushed in our workshops too. And so many of the other board members will be seeing it for the first time or the second time, but still, you know, it takes a while to digest so much data that is given to the members. And that's why we always ask for the data as quickly as you can get it to us so we can clearly understand it instead of doing it on the fly when we're in a meeting or we had it, you know, 2 days before. We understand it takes a lot for you all to pull this info together. So thank you again. And Jack, I appreciate that point. Okay.
Is this data on our website or something, or we have access? You know, I don't have access to her presentation here, or do I, so that we can be looking at that between now and then?
It was given to us. We do have it. If you look at the updated presentation slides from Erica, it's included there. So,
Yep.
thank you.
It's also posted publicly on the meeting page for today's meeting. So any members of the public who want to look at the slides can find them as well.
Thank you.
I just meant, do all board members have this? Because we got it on as a EPP subcommittee, but in preparation for the board meeting, will all board members have this ahead of time? Just if it's on the public website, we just need to make sure they're aware of that.
Yes, I could send out an email to them to make them aware that it is available.
Okay. Very good. Moving on, Erica, I'm going to turn it back to you, but we certainly want to have that discussion with our Tacti executive board members who have been very patient and spending time with us. We do want to go over a little bit, perhaps till 11:15. Do I have the time right? 11:15, if that is okay. If anyone has to leave, we certainly understand that. And we will do a better job in the future to be able to extend the time and have more time with the Tacti executive board. So Erica, is there anything you want to do to cue us up besides what I just said?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I suppose I should have scheduled a 2.5-hour block for this meeting. So my apologies that we're having to rush through a bit, but we would like to move ahead to the discussion with the Tacti executive board, and I will see if Elizabeth, if you would like to take the slides down, that would make it possible for us to see more people's faces. I'm not sure if she's able to do that right now, but if she can, that would be helpful.
And while she's doing that, there is no need for you to apologize. You can never estimate how long how many questions will come from committee members. So please, Erica, you did a great job. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dave Chiak, current president of Tacti. Thank you for inviting us. There are several other members of our executive committee here. I hope it's okay if I just jumped in. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. We really do appreciate being part of this working group. What a rich discussion. I was like, keep going, and so thank you. I'm currently the president of Tacti for the next 2 years. We had new elections, and I'll invite my colleagues at Tacti to also kind of jump in. But I just wanted to kind of make some kind of broad remarks and really hopefully spend some time on the retention data or the vacancy data that's there. I just wanted to kind of also give a shout out to Michael Derline for really rebuilding 10 Compass and the licensure processing. I remember when it was paper and submitting mail to national. And more recently, he probably would never share this. He made an amazing change. Once upon a time, the state required official transcripts of every institution, every higher ed institution that of the candidate we were recommending for licensure. So even if they went to a wonderful community college 20 years ago, that official transcript needed to be uploaded in terms of licensure recommendation. Now, that might still occur in some very rare, special circumstances, but for the vast majority, we just get to submit that final transcript from that institute that awarded the degree. That has saved a lot of money for a lot of aspiring teachers. because it costs at least $10 to get a transcript. And if you went to 7 different institutes of higher ed during your undergraduate career, that's $70 right there. And then we just start adding up all the other exams and all the other state requirements to become a teacher, in addition to cost of college and those various pathways. So that was one little bit that, multiplied by the number of teachers out there, just saved a lot of money for a lot of people. And, and I particularly think about our aspiring teachers from military families. They're shuffling around a lot. Those are, again, a lot of transcripts. So thank you, Michael, for that change. It has made it a whole lot easier and a whole lot less expensive for our candidates and for us to process the work. I thank you again for the annual reports. I do want to kind of tip my hat and say thank you to Dr. Cindy Lang from Carson Newman. Her and I serve on a little task force that Tacti has put together to develop surveys, completer surveys, as well as principal or employer surveys. And so that has been an area that once upon a time, I remember Jack was on the EPWG at that point when I was on that committee looking at that work. That was all pre-COVID. And so we've just, like all of us, there's been a lot going on in the last few years. And that was one of the things that moved to the back burner that we moved forward on our Tacti side. And so I'm happy to report that we've developed a survey that's currently getting reviewed. We identified a lot of items. The problem is we identified a lot of items. And so now we need to shrink it a little bit. So you all know when you're asked to do a survey, you want good information, but you can't ask too many questions and then the person just simply turns off. So that process is still moving forward, but we're very optimistic that this time next year we'll be piloting something and piloting something that could have some, standards across those surveys, completers and employer surveys for, that can be some shared data of the EPPs and add to the annual reports. I just want to talk a little bit more and spend some time on the vacancy data. And, this was a question that actually I brought up to our commissioner when we were so fortunate that she attends Tacti. I'm paraphrasing, but, we obviously hear a lot about the teacher pipeline, and we engage in building these pipelines with our local school partners, of course, with the support of the department. I sincerely thank the department's investments in building, sustainable teacher pipelines. I mean, the previous slides of the grow your own, the job embedded, that financial investment has not gone unnoticed. When I think of the data that was shared from Assistant Superintendent Vicki Hall, one of the things I would note, and not trying to push back, but I'm at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in full disclosure. And when I think about our 18-19 numbers, they were some of the lowest we ever had. What I didn't see were numbers of 1920, 2021, 21, 22. Our past 3 years of data, we've been seeing an increase in aspiring teachers, whether through our, quote, traditional programs of student teaching or internship. And we definitely have seen a spike in our job embedded programs over the past couple of years. And I think that has a lot to do with, people becoming still interested in becoming a teacher, and our collective responsibility of how do we make it a little bit easier? How do we redesign that so somebody can get paid while progressing through their teacher preparation program, as well as to go to school full time. Just like we hear it's hard to go to school full time if I can't work. Well, it's also hard to work full time and go to school full time. And a lot of us are trying to figure out those best practices of striking that balance so we don't inadvertently burn the teacher out before they've even started. But what we don't often hear about are efforts being made to retain highly qualified teachers. I was happy to hear about Tennessee being, aligned with other, well, not happy, but, concerned about our alignment and similarities of vacancies with other states across the nation. With that in mind, half of our teachers leave within 5 years. That's our national data. And if you're running a company and half of your employees who you just hired are gone, I would ask Michael to look at 10 Compass. Look at all the teachers we have certified who are eligible, who are not teaching. Why? It's retention. The pipeline has always been there. We have certified teachers who are out there, but just like Williamson County noted, they have left the profession or they left to other districts. It was interesting seeing the data that Oak Ridge and Maryville City, two systems in my neck of the woods, they're also the highest paid salaries. They also have, I think, some of the strongest working conditions there. They also have a lot of great resources there that sometimes we don't see in every school. We agree that every student, from the day they enter preschool to when they graduate, in every class, every year, they have a high quality teacher, and that teacher has the resources and the tools to do their job, effectively. Salary does make a difference too, but a lot of it are some of those resources that we might have to dig a little bit deeper into particular schools and school districts. I applaud, again, the department with its Grow Your Own. Clarksville Montgomery's model of the Department of Labor is another very promising area to support folks. But I wanted to shift that kind of conversation about getting new people into the profession of how are we going to retain the teachers that we do have? Because it will always be this revolving door if we can't keep people in the profession longer than a couple of years. I'm also kind of concerned about our job embedded. For the record, I'm an alternatively licensed teacher. That's how I became a teacher. I came late in the game, so I'm a big fan of them, and we need to have those pathways. But that's the pathway that's increasing. And as was described, these are, well, to take the analogy that was mentioned earlier about easier to become a lawyer than it is to be easier to become a teacher. Well, hopefully I never need a lawyer, but if I do, I would like to have somebody who actually went to law school prior to representing me. I would assume some of you all too. That's different in teaching. They are given keys to the door because they can pass and have been admitted to a net prep program. And often these are positions that are maybe not the most desirable. Or what is that induction really looking like? And this is a great opportunity that we're having with a lot of our local partners of what do we do on this induction and orientation for our job embedded, because that is a very co-developed, co-constructed, co-accountable, teacher there, because they are the local school employee and they're our student, and we are building those things. But again, they need something a little bit more. I mean, we all know that early career teacher who went through that traditional program needs 1, 2, and 3 years of continued mentoring support. Our job embedded, it's day one. And what are we doing on that retention side? So I'm going to pause here, take some questions, or ask some of my colleagues to kind of jump in and to make some comments if they'd like to.
One of the things that I want to comment that you said, and I always butcher your last name. Would you pronounce it again for me one more time? Because I don't want to call you David. You deserve to be called Dr. Dean, whatever. Is it Chihak?
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh gosh, somebody's going to laugh. I know those have heard it. I taught middle school, and so I was in that weird position, Erica, that of the need for middle school teachers, and so my mnemonic device was always kind of like a little chia pet, a little chiak.
I I went through that with my maiden name. No, none of my teachers could ever pronounce it because it was spelled so strangely for the way it was, you said it. Anyway, I get that. So,
Medically irregular.
so when we talk about job embedded, I happen to have a real vested interest in that because my daughter is a job embedded candidate, and the university sort of pushed her out the door to go that route. She wanted to complete, she had an undergraduate degree in English. She's now teaching high school English. She didn't want to just go into the classroom and technically be thrown to the wolves. And that's what happened to her. So she's still working to get her degree. She has one more year to go. She's working on a master's in this case. But she wanted that externship, I keep calling it externship, internship, that experience before she was in the classroom. So she wants to have excellent teaching skills. She wants to have that pedagogy, you know, the ed TPA type of training. So I think we need to address that. And I'm sure that there are many other candidates who feel the same way. So how do we as a board address that? And I think that's something, I think Sarah is on the phone, had to switch over to her car to move on to another meeting. But I think that's something we should take note of because my daughter expressed it and I was worried for her. She wants to be successful, but if we don't set them up for success, they might leave too, you know?
I agree with you 100%. And I know we've worked hard, and a lot of my fellow EPP friends have worked hard on making sure that we had multiple pathways, multiple options. You know, in this case, where we have a post-bac job embedded program, but we also have a post-bac internship program, you know, for somebody that wants to go that quote more traditional route. So those programs do exist out there. Unfortunately, you know, how we market that, you know, probably could be a whole lot better. Recognizing that there might be some universities and colleges that's a better fit for others, you know.
Yes, and that's a great point. And the other thing too is how is the candidate uh, given that advice on which is the best way to go, because that's what happened to her. I think if she had it to do over, she would have done it a different way. And so I only use her as an example because it's a real story that ties into what you said. So anyway, I think we
You know, and I agree. And that's, you know, one of those things where I'll even admit a little in house, we have some of those being able to communicate. I mean, when I started our program, we had 54 licensure programs. Now we have over 100 in multiple pathways. And so even to get some of my faculty to communicate, maybe this isn't it. How about this option or that option? So
it's challenging for sure. Yeah.
I think something that you said too that really hit me was half of our teachers leave within the first 5 years. And that the pipeline has always been there, but retention is the key. And, you know, I knew that there was, you know, a lot of teachers that left. I didn't realize that number was half. And then you couple that with the fact that by 2025, I think more than 30% of our teachers will be eligible to retire. So that makes you even wonder if even more are going to be leaving. And so we got to keep that pipeline full by these various methods, but we got to figure out how to retain the teachers that we have, whether it's through differentiated pay or whatever it is that keeps them teaching, we need to work on.
thank you, Mr. Eby. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I was quoting more of the national, you know, I mean, I don't know specifically at the state, you know, Tennessee, but you know, that's always been kind of a percentage you hear about. So hopefully I didn't use too much liberty, but you know, it's a very high percentage of folks leaving, you know, and you know, it's pretty significant after their first 3 years. And I understand that, you know, some folks, you know, there's career advancement. I mean, a lot of job opportunities in Nashville that didn't exist once upon a time, and competing with, you know, those particular salaries. And but yeah, that's one of the things that we can't help but think about, that we can produce all the teachers out there. And that's what's been remarkable for the department to really have that investment. And we work with our partners to try to fill out that retention side, but that's where some of our limitation is. You know, except out of the job embedded side, you know, after they leave us, it's hard for me to knock on our partners' doors to instruct them about retention efforts. But you know, most of the ones I talk to understand and are trying to do things about that, possibly through differentiated pay, you know.
But it is important to understand there are many elements to the retention challenge, and the facility and the leadership and all the things that you mentioned that you observed with Oak Ridge and one of the other districts. They have all these great things that are there, and the climate, the culture, the leadership. But it could also be simply I went this path. I got in the classroom, and after a year, it's like, oh, I can't do this. I should have known. I should have found this out sooner. But it's a variety of reasons, and I think we could do our best to try to get a handle on it. The things that are within the control of the district really has to do with the principal leadership and so on and so forth. The other teachers, the team. What kind of support do I have from the internal structure with my co-workers? Are they supportive of me? Do they give me a hard time? We hear different stories about teachers of color not feeling supported by other teachers, and so that's a real challenge too. But you're right, retention is really critically important.
And that's where I was happy to hear Assistant Superintendent talk about also, the wellness part of it that really COVID uncovered for a lot of our teachers and educators, that, we don't have a job. When you think about other professions that were on the front lines, like in nursing, well, and doctors, when they leave the hospital, they're not having to call all their patients, maybe some are. But when the teacher leaves at 3, 4, 5 o'clock, well, that evening they're now calling parents, to do all their conferences and their phone checks. I've often heard about, the 2-month. They're not being. That's because of contract. They're on a 9-month contract, so they're only getting paid, the months that they're teaching. It's not really a time off. If you looked at a 12-month contract and they had 2 months off, well, then we could talk about that.
Right.
But I think there's overall professionalism is going to be very important as we kind of move forward to, not only attract people into the profession, but really valuing them to stay in the profession.
Yeah, and that whole onboarding process too, in particular, when you think today about the climate that exists in the country, and the pressures that teachers are getting from all those external sources, and the parents who are perhaps calling the school or coming to the school and badgering the teacher and upset with what you taught or what you said, or whether it's appropriate or not remains to be seen. But certainly there's a lot of that kind of pressure today that can become unbearable. And that's when one of the things we heard was, that's when the teacher pay starts to be an issue, because you're not paying me enough to put up with the level of pressure that I'm experiencing with all of these other factors and the constant changes that just do not stop. It continues on and on and on. But it doesn't mean we still need to look at it in your capacity. You're highlighting it, and we have to look at it as well. But it's kind of, we all own it to a large degree, to a certain degree. Anyway,
Yes.
I know. Go ahead.
Well, my only recommendation would be is really kind of, if there's a lever of making sure we have those exit surveys, and asking those questions. It was great to hear, Assistant Superintendent mentioned about their exit surveys, but does that happen in all our LEAs? I mean, those are some of the conversations we're starting to have with our partners. Why are they leaving? And there can be very valid reasons, but if there are those reasons within our control, what can we do better?
Right. I know the hour is late, and we're going to need to wrap up in a minute because we're going to lose some of our study committee members. Anything else that you all want to say before we depart?
I just wanted to jump in here. I'm Cindy Lang at Carson Newman University on the east side of the state. And as we look at numbers and data, and when you look at the vacancies and the preponderance of vacancies in city schools, and then when you talk about we want all Tennessee students to have equal access to the same high quality education, no matter where they live. I think of the two schools I always point out when I'm talking to my Foundations of Education students are those in Knoxville at Hardin Valley Academy versus Austin East High School. And when you look at, teachers at Austin East and students at Austin East who are worried about shootings versus the beautiful facility that Hardin Valley High School has, there is not equality, and it's difficult for the morale of not only the teachers but the students to want to stay, to want to perform well. And so that, I know it's a vicious cycle, and I know we can't solve all of those things, but it is kind of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. You want to attract people to those places. You want good teachers in those schools, but it's a dangerous school to be in. And it does not have the same amount of money poured into it to have a nice facility. And it's difficult to have pride in what you do, whether you're a student or a teacher at a place like that.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that certainly holds very true at in other industries have similar challenges, but nothing like, in my opinion, the education profession, in particular when the money's just not there, and everybody wants a great work environment, a great place to go and feel comfortable and feel safe. And when that doesn't exist, we can expect to have issues and challenges. There's no doubt about it. But thank you for sharing that with us, Dr. Lang. Thank you all for being here today. One more time, and then we'll adjourn. I don't want to cut anybody off who has something to say.
Madam Chair. Oh, I just wanted to say
Yes.
thank you. Thank you for always including us.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm so glad that this is something that our team at the state board staff recommended. I think it was a wise decision, and I think we should continue to do that. So thank you so much for being with us and for your comments, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. So you all have a great rest of the day, and we are officially adjourned. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.